Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest by Jim Burrows. Aunt Jenny is embarked on a river journey to seek the advice of the sage Alba Heath. Chapter 6, Twilight and Dark Water. Within a day, by local reckoning, Aunt Jenny, Morwenna, Three, and the animals boarded the Osprey, a large lateen-sailed fishing boat. They headed west, or duskward, toward the land of twilight. Scathach had sent word both by earlier ships and by messages carried by bird, and hoped that an ally would be ready to meet them. Morwenna found Aunt Jenny leaning on the rail, gazing out across the watery expanse of the Great Lake. One could almost mistake it for a true sea and not a mere lake. Are there seas in the Halflands, then, Morwenna? I, too, lap our shores, the endless ocean and the open sea. Each stretches to countless worlds and realms. Unbounded by the confines of a single small blue globe, do they really go on forever? I doubt that anyone truly knows. There are tales that the open sea stretches out to the very stars themselves, a black sea in an endless night with stars in all directions, even below the sea itself. Really, what a strange world we've found ourselves in. Wonderful, at least, Morwenna smiled, though I must say that the one time I snuck into mortal lands, I found them passing strange. A matter of what we know and where we're from, I suppose. You are sounding more wistful, pensive than usual, Aunt Jenny. Having left her behind has made me think about Sasha, about the danger I have brought her into. No doubt Scathach, the Scathach of ancient Irish myths dating back a millennium or two, can keep her safer than I could ever do, but I feel guilty still, leaving her on her own. 'Tis understandable. She and her fellows at your school, they are like family to you. They call you aunt and must share that family feeling. How can you not worry? Thank you. Aunt Jenny turned to face Morwenna. To be honest, when you say things like that is when you make me feel most secure. You are a fairy warrior, one of the fair folk, someone out of a fairy tale or myth, someone that no one back home even believes in. You don't look quite human. Your eyes, your ears, and that voice. Jenny closed her eyes and gave her head a little shake. No one human sounds like that. Still, when you say such homey things, when you show how much alike we can be, human and fey folk, then I can believe that all will be well. Morwenna smiled. Jenny continued, if you can be both unhuman and so humane, well, then we are all folk, and this world that seems so strange with monsters, werewolves, fairies, and all, well, it is just another place. A place my great-aunt knew when she was just a little girl, a place where she survived and thrived. And they turned back and gazed out across the broad waters. Jenny sighed. Still, to hear that so much went wrong for lack of me. Perhaps you should sleep and be rested when we land, came the soft contralto reply. Perhaps, Jenny agreed. And sleep she did, and awoke to what she was assured was morning, though it looked just as much like dusk as when she went to sleep. Still, she broke her fast with Morwenna, Three, and the ship's captain. Breakfast included fruit, oranges, she noted. Even here, where fishermen looked like some strange cross between the characters of Moby Dick and the Book of 1001 Nights, they knew to eat citrus at sea. The moon here was huge and the sun small. The clouds glowed, and the water seemed to have a silvery sheen. At last made the fishermen happy. The waters of the river Dansheen, moonshine, grunted the captain approvingly. Not corrupted by the blight, he whispered at last, and the next, or the poisoned waters. We'll travel upstream of here to fish, closer to the shore after we've landed you, so as to let the fishes hereabout grow. Mayhap they'll restore more of the lake." Aunt Jenny scanned the shore. The foliage was odd and somewhat unfamiliar. Oh, the shapes were more or less familiar, tall conifers, trees with leaves like oak, elm, and ash, but the colors were odd. Some were jet black, others glittered silver. Nary a one was green. The colors reminded Jenny of the illustrations of the forests of twilight in the Moon Maid story, though in the book the shapes were strange as well. "How far up river will you take us?" Jenny asked the captain. "Not far by the look of it." He pointed toward the river's mouth. After a few moments, Aunt Jenny saw what he was pointing to, a small boat with a black sail, and in its prow a dark figure holding a lantern. "'Twould seem you've been met." "Can you see who it is?" asked Aunt Jenny. The captain, tall, with a fey cast to his features, raised his hand to his temple and stared fixedly for a time. Finally he said, "Unless I am far off course, I'd wager 'tis the Lady Ashetta herself." "The Silver Huntress of little Jenny and the Moon Maid?" "I know not that tale, but the Lady of Twilight is oft called the Silver Huntress by her gloss or kenning." "I see. How should I address her?" "Lady or Milady should do, depending upon your allegiances," interjected Morwenna. "And refer to her?" "Lady Ashetta, if you do not mind her taking notice. By kenning, with or without gloss, if you would be more discreet. Moon Maid and Silver Huntress, as you have already noted. Dark's Champion, with or without the Slayer of Monster gloss. Lady Twilight is not amiss either, as reference or address." "Oh, for a place where names are not magic," Jenny sighed. "Is there such a place?" wondered Morwenna. "I used to think so." After some maneuvering, the two vessels rendezvoused at the mouth of the Dansheen. "Permission to come aboard, Captain," called Ashetta. "Granted, milady." Ashetta leapt nimbly aboard the larger ship. That she was tall and beautiful didn't surprise Aunt Jenny, but the silver streaks at the temples of her long jet-black hair and the crow's feet and laugh lines marking her alabaster skin did. She'd begun to think that she was the only person in this world who showed signs of age. Somehow, Ashetta's apparent age was more surprising than her glittering silver eyes. The silky musical tones of her voice were an enthralling distraction. "So you are the promised one I was told to expect." "So they tell me," Aunt Jenny smiled. "I look forward to hearing your tale. So, do you prefer horseback or boat?" "Either is fine," replied Jenny. "Well, then, the trip by water is more entertaining and, for the most part, safer." "For the most part?" Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Yes, to get to your destination by boat, one must travel far downstream, and the darkling cascades are not gentle." Ashetta smiled and shrugged. "But what is a safer way to navigate rough waters than in the Lady of the Moon's boat?" "What indeed?" Ashetta turned to the captain. "My apologies for the brevity of my visit, but we must needs be quickly under way." "Of course, milady. Lads," he turned to order the crew, "be quick, get the passengers' kits aboard her ladyship's vessel." Soon Aunt Jenny found herself, Morwenna, the animals, and their things aboard Ashetta's boat, the Leaping Hind. It was an elegant and graceful little single-masted lateen-sailed ship, with a surprisingly spacious hold below decks and comfortable cabins in a stern castle. She was crewed by a half-dozen sturdy low fays, shorter and stockier than three, and less human-looking. Rumblers, Aunt Jenny guessed, based on the fairy sailors who featured in a number of the more nautical Little Jenny tales. Once their things were stowed and Ashetta had given orders to number one, Jenny wondered if the title was more akin to threes or to nautical usage for executive officers, or if the two forms were themselves related. They settled down in Ashetta's cabin. "You look much as I might have imagined young Jennifer would look in her later days," Ashetta observed. Aunt Jenny chuckled. "I'll confess that I have seen hints of her, as I knew her as a child, looking back at me from the mirror every now and again. Her hair was redder, though. Did you know her well?" It's hard to know how seriously to take the books. Not long. She was with me through most of 2 cycles of the moon. She was a doughty lass, a young lady in the first flower of her womanhood. The storybooks always portrayed her as if she was the same age as in the first book, 10 years old, with ringlets and the same sailor dress and beret. If family stories are true, she disappeared for 3 months at 10, then for 3 more years when she was 12. Time does not always travel here as it does in mortal lands, but she had been in the Halflands for a number of years by the time that I met her. She fought well for a mortal. So she really did help you take back the night? It has ever been my mission to make the nighttime a refuge and not the haunt of monsters. The Mother of Monsters had recently sent many of her brood to harry Twilight. Young Jennifer and the Ruffley man came here on their quest for the Hidden Road, while we were besieged by a horde of Lamiae. He was of little aid, but she comported herself well with bow and sword. Aunt Jenny smiled, suppressing a chuckle. That's not quite the way the story got told in Little Jenny and the Moon Maid back home. Oh, you were shown to be dedicated to taking back the night from the Leatherwings, the Nightgaunts and their ilk. But little 10-year-old Jenny in her summer dress could hardly be shown wielding weapons at your side, so she mostly suffered bravely, saved by you and the Ruffley man. I'm glad to know that my great-aunt was more valiant than that. Nashetta nodded. By the time word had gone out that she was the forerunner and not the promised one, seeing her on the verge of her womanhood fight and inspire others, and knowing that the promised one would exceed her in skill and influence, I was much encouraged. How great would be the last queen of Avalon? And instead you get me, late to the game. There are many paths to greatness, and if it is your fate, I am sure your path will find its way to its proper end. Well, I hope so, though I cannot for the life of me see how I can earn such titles. Last queen, promised one. Jenny shook her head. Scathach sent you forth with a sword at your hip. Ashetta gestured to the sword belt and rapier that Aunt Jenny had set by Morwenna and Ashetta's weapons on a side table when they'd all entered the cabin. She would not have let you wear it did she think you incapable of using it to effect, nor have sent you with such a small escort, nor given your import. At this point there was a rapping at the door of the cabin. "Milady, milady," rumbled number 1. "Enter," she commanded, and in an instant he did, pulling off his knit sailor's cap. "Monsters, milady, there be monsters in both sea and air. They be comin' fast." Ashetta got quickly to her feet, followed immediately by Morwenna. They'd each fetched their bows and swords before Aunt Jenny even rose from her seat. She strapped on her sword belt and followed them to the deck. 3, Big Tom and Rudy began to scamper after her. 3, keep Rudy and Tom in here and out of mischief. He did what he could, but by the time he could close the door, Tom was already at Jenny's side. She stepped cautiously out onto the deck, taking in the surroundings. Ashetta and Morwenna were amidships, back to back, bows drawn. Aunt Jenny followed the line of Ashetta's aim just in time to see her arrow bury itself deep in the heart of something large, winged, and terrible. It was vaguely humanoid, the color of dried blood, with leather wings, horns, and tail. Leatherwing? Nightgaunt? Not as either had appeared in the Moon Maid illustrations. The artist had not wanted to give his young readers nightmares. Whatever it was, it screamed horrifically and began to fall. Aunt Jenny's gaze flashed all around, seldom catching one of the things before it was struck by Ashetta's or Morwenna's arrows. Rumblers were scrambling on the deck, adjusting sails, bringing behind to a course for open waters. So intent was Aunt Jenny on the aerial attack that she did not see the water horror before it was nearly on top of her. Fortunately, Big Tom had seen it. He leapt at the creature's head. The tall green creature stopped and backhanded the cat across the deck. Outraged, Aunt Jenny drew rapier and dagger and dropped into a defensive crouch. "No!" she screamed at the wet, slimy thing. Like the winged creatures, it was vaguely humanoid, tall and gaunt, with taloned hands. Its snarling mouth revealed a pair of long fangs amongst its pointed teeth. It bore down upon her, and when it was within her reach, she lunged. the leaping, fully extended all-body lunge that had been the Italian's secret move centuries before. The startled creature, unfamiliar with the art of the fence, stared down at the rapier buried deep in its heart, bewildered by the realization that it was dead. Aunt Jenny withdrew the blade with a quick, savage twist and retreated toward the cabin door. The thing, astonished to see blood pumping from the now ragged wound, collapsed in a heap. Only when it was lying lifeless on the deck did Jenny feel the price her body paid for that lunge. She could feel it in every joint from left ankle to right wrist. Bone jarring became a very meaningful concept. Still, she resumed her fencer's defensive posture, a stance that she slowly realized was better suited to the épée of her youth than the two-weapons form that Scapa had lately taught her. It was well suited to the lunge she had executed, but uncertain that she had another such in her, she shifted to the low two-weapon stance as the next sea horror came around the corner. Shifting from side to side, she managed to keep it well back, eyeing her blades as she poked at it. "I'm getting too old for these things," she muttered, wondering just what in hell she thought she was doing, when suddenly it too got that astonished look she'd seen on its fallen companion. It looked down at the arrowhead, dark with its blood, that had burst from its chest. A second arrowhead appeared, and it collapsed, revealing Asheta, smiling and knocking yet another arrow. She turned quickly, scanning the sky, deck, and sea, then slowly she and Morwenna lowered their weapons. Aunt Jenny dropped the points of hers, sighed, and stood, aching. Big Tom sauntered over and took a swipe at the first creature before moving to his mistress' side. Morwenna strode to it and flipped Jenny's kill from its side to its back. Biting the inside of her cheek, she said, "I'm rather sorry I didn't see more than a glance of that encounter." "Well, I don't expect to engage in a repeat performance, even for you to admire. In fact, if no one minds, I think I'll just go sit down now." A few minutes later, Morwenna entered Asheta's cabin and set a soft rag, a jar of oil, and a chamois on the table next to Aunt Jenny. "I fetched these from your pack." "Thank you," said Jenny, and began to clean her weapons. "I was thinking about getting them myself, but this chair is so beguiling after that." Asheta strode in a little later. "The corpses have been disposed of, and we are back on course. Are you hungry?" "Now that you mention it, yes. My hunger rivals my aches," Aunt Jenny answered. "Aye," agreed Morwenna. "Cookie?" Moments later, one of the rumblers rolled in. "Yes, m'lady? We'll be needing supper." "Yes, m'lady, I've lamb stew already going. 'Twill be but a moment, or three," and he scampered out. Aunt Jenny finished cleaning and polishing her blades and resheathed them. Big Tom, who had been waiting patiently, leapt into her lap immediately. "I will say it again, I'm getting too old for these things," Jenny declared. "Nonsense, you finished off one foe and stood off a second. A fine showing," opined the slayer of monsters. "Tell that to my arthritis." "Gladly." After a thought and a little murmuring, Asheta continued, "Arthritis. You are bone-weary? Sore?" "Exactly. I have just the thing." She fetched a small earthenware pot with a cork plug, which she handed to Aunt Jenny. Jenny opened the pot to find it contained an oily, pale pink salve that smelled of spices, lavender, and other flowers. She rubbed it into her aching right hand and pumped her fist a few times. "Thank you, that really helps. Still," she shook her head. Rumblers arrived bearing bowls of steaming lamb stew, crusty bread, and flagons of warm spiced mead. "To return to the subject of your role in the current crisis, you realize it has never been about your combat skills or any such thing," said Asheta after everyone had gotten started on their supper. "I am, for instance, a daughter of the Titans, and have lived more than 100 times your lifespan, and I am not the only one in this land. One human from mortal lands would have to be truly remarkable to exceed what we who have combated she who was once a dragon have accomplished." "The Titans? As in the parents of the ancient gods? Asked Jenny. Why, yes, that is how humans of the mortal lands have generally viewed us. Aunt Jenny closed her eyes in thought for a moment. And things went to pot because my Aunt Mary waylaid a piece of jewelry and I was late to the party? Went to... I see. Yes, that is what I have heard. I think I'm going to need more than one pot of that salve and a lot more of this, she said, lifting the flagon of spiced mead and finishing it. Done. And Shetta gestured to one of the rumblers who scurried in to refill the flagon. Have you any idea what I am supposed to do? I believe that is the answer Scatha bid me to help you find. 'Tis nothing that I am knowledgeable of. We need a scholar. Such as the one to be found downstream? I doubt anyone knows the matter better, none alive at least. Aunt Jenny considered asking whether that meant that he was the most knowledgeable or just the most accessible, but thought better of it. Never ask a question that you don't want the answer to, after all. Not long after that, Aunt Jenny retreated to her cabin for some much-needed sleep. She awoke to the sound of activity on the deck, got up, and went out to see what the commotion was. Morwenna answered her unasked question. The Darkling waters are in sight, and they're securing in preparation for the Darkling Cascades. The Darkling Cascades? The lands to the south of the Great Lake are all lower than the lake. Where the summer fall is precipitous, here the Darkling waters take a more gradual journey to the open sea. Rather than one great summer fall, the dark water flows down many lesser falls and cascades. To take a vessel as large as this safely through them requires the magic of one such as Asheta. Mortal folk might hazard it in a small, sturdy boat, especially built to paddle down such waters or go afoot. Whitewater rafting or kayaking, I see. But we will be taking a sailing ship instead? Charming. Oh, 'tis great fun, declared Asheta, who arrived at that point. An adventure. Jenny was not entirely convinced. Whitewater sailing? It sounds like an adventure, she said, but did not add that an adventure is somebody else having a hell of a tough time far, far away. The rumblers were erecting a circle of yard-high poles around a larger pole in their center. They then mounted silver filigree spheres about the size of soccer balls on the top of each of the six, and finally a larger globe atop the center pole. Asheta strode to the pole and rested her hands upon the central globe. She murmured for several seconds until a soft blue glow appeared within the globe. The murmur became more of a chant as the glow brightened and then spread to the lesser globes. Once the glows were bright in all 7 globes, she fell quiet and raised her arms straight out to her sides. She flicked her right wrist and then left, and when she did, the right and leftmost globes flew quickly to take up positions atop the rail on either side of the ship. 2 more gestures sent globes to stern and prow. 2 more, and there was a globe sitting atop the Heinz mast and another down the hatch into the depths of the hold. Asheta rested both hands on the remaining globe, the largest, and lowered her head in concentration. Aunt Jenny could tell that she was exerting some sort of effort, but not the nature of it. After a while, though, the blue light englobed the whole ship, which seemed to rise slightly out of the water and speed up. "Make for the Cascades, number 1," called Asheta. "Aye, milady. Come in 2 points to starboard." "If I may," Aunt Jenny asked when Asheta had rejoined Morwenna, 3 and her, "what was all that?" Asheta smiled. "Certainly. Harnessing the power of the moon to protect the Hind. Just as the moon controls the sea and waves, it can lift the ship. We rise somewhat above the waves and the white water, as you call it. 'Twill smooth our journey and keep us from the rocks." Apparently, it made the ship run lighter as well as higher, because she was definitely picking up speed, and she had already been fast and agile. Soon they were entering the mouth of the dark water, here a broad, dark, slow-moving river, flanked by the tall trees of darkwood. Further to the east than twilight, this area was still dusky, the light dimmer than the areas around High Winds and the Shadowed Isle. Many trees with silvery leaves were scattered among the green. She saw no sign of the black leaves of twilight, though. And we will follow Aunt Jenny further on her journey down the dark water next time.